They say that when the lights flicker in an empty room, it's just a glitch in the grid. But what happens when the glitch has a legal name? What happens when a house's silence is officially recognized as a material defect by a court of law? Tonight, we perform a surgical autopsy on the invisible. We are moving the monsters from the ancient basement to the modern server room, tracing the line from the clanging chains of Rome to the 19 Hz frequency that makes your eyeballs vibrate with fear. We aren't just looking for spirits, we are auditing the Spectral Ledger. Stay tuned because the mist is rising, and it has no intention of letting us leave unscathed. The evolution of the ghost is not a linear progression of faith or a simple accumulation of folklore, but a clinical and often brutal transition from the corporeal to the purely informational. To truly understand the modern specter, we must first perform a surgical autopsy on the Roman foundation, stripping away centuries of romanticized mist and Victorian sentimentality to reveal the cold, grinding gears of ancient fear. Pliny the Younger did not merely record a chilling tale in his Epistola 7, to entertain his aristocratic peers in the 1st century. He effectively drafted the first technical manual for the phenomenon we now categorize as the haunted house. He provided the definitive blueprint for the entire genre, the rhythmic clattering of iron, the nocturnal metallic noise that shatters the silence of a domestic sanctuary, and the archetype of the intellectual hero represented by the philosopher Athenodorus. This figure does not confront the irrational with holy water, prayers, or superstitious charms. Instead, he approaches the abyss with a lamp, a writing tablet, and a systematic observation that refuses to be intimidated by the unknown. In the Roman heart of Athens, a specter terrorized a large and spacious dwelling until it was abandoned, leaving a vacuum of productivity and life. The property became a dead zone in the city's ledger, a place where the air grew heavy, and the sounds of chains dragging across stone became a constant lethal presence. This cycle of decay only ended when Athenodorus, driven by a desire for data and a refusal to succumb to primal terror, followed the sound of the rattling chains to discover the material truth buried beneath the floorboards, a skeleton bound in rusted, corroded iron. The ghost was not a wisp of energy. It was a physical reminder of a legal and social debt that had not been paid. In this classical era, a ghost was a boundary marker, a physical manifestation of social transgressions, legal injustices, or the failure to perform proper burial rites. It was not a poetic metaphor for the internal process of grief. It was a soul condemned to the physical plane, because the human heart failed to uphold the sacred pact of the ritual. The presence of specters in Roman literature was not limited to solemn chronicles or philosophical letters. It permeated the gritty satire of Petronius and the raucous theater of Plautus. In works like Mostellaria, the infested house was treated with a sophisticated mixture of genuine dread and cynical mockery, reflecting a society that understood the power of the past to disrupt the present. These accounts reflect a deep-seated cultural belief in the absolute importance of limits. Those who tinkered with the borders between the quick and the dead, or who were denied the finality of a proper grave, were destined to persist in a state of agonizing resonance, unable to cross the threshold into total non-existence. This is the primordial origin of what we now call the stone tape concept, the pervasive idea that the environment itself acts as a permanent recording medium for human trauma. The stone of the villa does not just hold the physical weight of the building, it holds the psychological weight of the agony experienced within its walls. In the Christian medieval era, the ghost was re-engineered into the revenant, a being with a marked, terrifying physicality returning under divine consent to demand reparations from the living. These were not ethereal, translucent entities. They were dense, rotting beings returning from the grave to demand prayers, fasts, or specific acts of penance for unconfessed sins. Treatises like the Formicarius of Johannes Nider utilize these accounts as didactic hammers to enforce a rigid moral and social order. If the signals were terrifying and violent, involving the destruction of property or physical assault, they served to lead the living back to the path of divine justice. If the noises were merely annoying, the scratching at the door, the movement of household objects, or the disruption of sleep, they were often dismissed as demonic nuisances seeking to importune the fragile peace of the faithful. We are looking at a dark history where the spirit was utilized as an administrative tool of both the crown and the church, to maintain control over the living through the persistent, terrifying presence of the dead. The ghost was the ultimate debt collector in a society where the soul was the primary currency of power. When we analyze these archaic foundations, we see that the haunting is never about the dead, it is always about the living and their failure to resolve the past. Whether it is the Athenian specter pointing to its unburied bones or the medieval revenant demanding a mass for its soul, the message is the same: the ledger must be balanced. We have inherited this blueprint, but we have stripped away the moral weight, leaving us with the rattling chains of a history we no longer know how to read. We are walking through the ruins of an ancient pact, wondering why the air feels so cold, and why the sounds in the walls feel like a judgment we are no longer equipped to understand. This is the architecture of persistence, a structure built on the bones of those we tried to delete from our history for the sake of efficiency and modern comfort. By the arrival of the 18th century, the perception of the miraculous underwent a profound and cynical transformation, moving away from the terrifying gravity of divine judgment toward a far more mundane engine, financial desperation. The ghost was no longer merely a theological warning. It became a sophisticated commodity for the economically marginalized within the brutal machinery of the early industrial world. To understand this shift, we must perform a surgical autopsy on the 1762 Cock Lane ghost in London. This event was one of the first major milestones in the technical exposure of supernatural fraud through rigorous academic and legal scrutiny. This event was a meticulously calculated narrative, born from the jagged edges of a financial grudge. Elizabeth Parsons, a 12-year-old girl, became the epicenter of a phenomenon that paralyzed London, claiming to be the channel for the spirit of Fanny Linz. The mechanics were deceptively simple, a binary system of knocks and scratching noises that echoed through the halls of Cock Lane. The spectral accusations were lethal, claiming she had been murdered with arsenic by William Kent. However, investigation revealed that this ghostly crusade was a weapon designed to settle an unpaid debt Richard Parsons owed to Kent. The miraculous was being utilized as a tool for character assassination and economic leverage. The fraud was ultimately stripped bare by a commission of elite intellectuals led by Dr. Samuel Johnson. Their systematic observation exposed the physical mechanics of the deception. Elizabeth was caught concealing a small piece of wood under her clothing to produce the rhythmic rappings that the public had mistaken for a voice from the abyss. This case represents the transition of the apparition from a divine intervention into a criminal conspiracy of malicious intent. It illustrates how financial resentment can serve as the primary engine for supernatural narratives that exploit the collective anxiety of a society. The ghost had been demoted from a messenger of God to a defendant in a conspiracy trial, ending with Richard Parsons being sentenced to the pillory and prison. As we entered the 19th century, this economy of the miraculous scaled into global movements. The birth of modern spiritualism in 19,848, in Hydesville, New York, was a masterpiece of physical trickery, orchestrated by Maggie and Kate Fox. They claimed to be in communication with the spirit of a murdered peddler, using raps that seemed to defy natural explanation. However, the reality was grounded in the raw physicality of the human body. In her 1888 confession, Margaret Fox detailed exactly how they had spent years manipulating the anatomy of their own feet, specifically the joints of their toes and ankles, against the hollow floors to produce sounds interpreted as profound messages from the dead. They utilized everyday objects, such as apples tied to heavy strings, to strike the floorboards and maintain the illusion of an external presence when their own joints grew tired. Despite this total collapse of credibility, the system they created evolved into a rigid, self-sustaining religious structure, the National Spiritualist Association of Churches. This organization illustrates a tragic aspect of human nature, the absolute refusal to let go of the miraculous, even when its mechanical gears and fraudulent pulleys are exposed. They pivoted their doctrine, claiming the spirits continued to learn in higher spheres, essentially arguing that the truth of the movement was independent of the fraud of its creators. This is the precise point where the biography of the specter becomes a brutal autopsy of human desire. We treat the miraculous as a resource to be harvested and consumed for comfort, power, or profit. The transition from the terrifying revenant of the Middle Ages to the rapping spirit of the Fox sisters reveals a movement away from moral accountability and toward informational entertainment. We have replaced the terrifying gravity of divine judgment with the shallow, fleeting thrill of the Sidiance room. When the gold of ancestral wonder is systematically replaced by the rigid, quantified lines of the commercial ledger, the world ceases to be a sacred sanctuary and becomes a cold place of mere survival. We are now a civilization of hungry ghosts, trying to find substance in the echoes of parlor tricks, trading the infinite weight of the soul for the temporary convenience of a marketable miracle. Modern investigation has successfully moved the hunt for the specter from the dimly lit, smoke-filled seance rooms of the Victorian era into the clinical, uncompromising environment of the laboratory. We are no longer chasing shadows through faith, We are identifying the specific biophysical causes for what was previously categorized as purely metaphysical or supernatural intervention. To understand the modern haunting, we must confront the groundbreaking reality discovered by engineer Vic Tandy in 1998. The phenomenon known as the frequency of fear. This is not a ghost in the traditional sense, but a precise 19 Hz infrasound frequency that sits just below the threshold of human hearing, yet possesses the physical power to manipulate the human organism at a fundamental level. This specific frequency matches the resonant frequency of the human eyeball. When an environment emits this low-frequency vibration, often caused by industrial fans, wind tunnels, or specific architectural configurations, the eyeball begins to vibrate within its socket. This resonance induces peripheral optical hallucinations. The brain, attempting to interpret the distorted visual data, creates gray figures or shadows that appear to move just on the edge of sight. These are not entities from another dimension. They are the mechanical result of your own anatomy trembling under the stress of an invisible vibration. The sense of absolute pavor, the cold chill on the neck, and the instinctual desire to flee a room are biological survival mechanisms triggered by a physical stimulus that the conscious mind cannot hear, but the body acutely feels. We are witnessing the translation of fear into a technical specification. Furthermore, we must analyze the stimulation of the temporal lobe through low electromagnetic fields. Clinical research demonstrated that subjecting the brain to specific magnetic patterns can induce the profound sensation of an external presence, even in a laboratory environment that is completely empty. The mind, hardwired to find agency and intent in the world around it, invents a presence to categorize the invisible electromagnetic stimulus it is receiving. This is the true anatomy of the modern haunting, a sophisticated combination of high-tech environmental triggers and the ancient, survival-based processing of the human brain. We are not being hunted by the spirits of the dead, we are being haunted by the glitches in our own bioelectrical machines and the toxicological realities of our environments, such as carbon monoxide-induced hypoxia, which generates sleep paralysis and terrifying auditory visions. This biophysical deconstruction extends to the darkest corners of spectral history, specifically the legendary substance known as ectoplasm. Once championed as the physical exteriorization of the soul, ectoplasm was eventually subjected to rigorous chemical and microscopic analysis. The results were not divine, but grotesquely material and intentionally deceptive. Analysis of samples captured from high-profile mediums revealed a cynical mixture of butter muslin, egg whites, chewed paper, and various chemicals designed to mimic biological tissue under low-light conditions. Mediums like Helen Duncan were documented utilizing the biological mechanism of induced regurgitation, swallowing large quantities of cloth before a session only to expel it in the darkness, to mimic a materializing spirit. The absolute insistence on total darkness during these sessions was never a requirement of the spirit's sensitivity to light, but a mandatory defensive rule to prevent the detection of these crude physical visual tricks. We have stripped the world of its organic mystery to make it more efficient and predictable, but in doing so, we have simply become more isolated within our own technological nightmare. The mist that used to surround the human experience is being cleared by the cold, sanitizing light of frequency mapping and chemical analysis, leaving us with a raw, bitter reality that many are still too fragile to acknowledge. We have traded the sacred pact for the technical specification, leaving us wandering in a landscape of digital shadows, where the only thing truly haunting us is the emptiness of the world we have constructed. The laboratory has replaced the cathedral, and in the process the spirit has been reduced to a wave on an oscilloscope or a residue in a petri dish. This reductionism creates a new kind of haunting, the haunting of the void. When we explain away the ghost through infrasound or temporal lobe stimulation, we solve the technical mystery but deepen the existential crisis. We find ourselves in a universe that is perfectly explained but completely silent. The biophysics of the void tells us that our fear is real, but its object is a mirage produced by our own flawed senses. We are biological machines living in a world of physical triggers, constantly misinterpreting the mechanical for the miraculous. As we map the last remaining shadows of the paranormal, we must ask ourselves what remains of the human experience once every chill and every vision has been catalogued as a sensory error. We are the architects of a world without ghosts. Yet, we have never felt more surrounded by the presence of something missing. The autopsy of the specter is complete, and the cause of death is the disappearance of wonder. For the phenomena that seem to repeat without intelligence, without intent, and without interaction, we must look to the physics of information and the geology of the structures we inhabit. This is the core of the stone tape theory, a hypothesis that suggests events of high emotional charge or extreme trauma can be recorded into the very molecular structure of the materials that surround us. Limestone, quartz, and other minerals found in traditional building materials act as a primitive form of magnetic recording medium. When you hear the phantom sound of footsteps in an old corridor, or see a figure walking through a wall that used to be a door, you are not witnessing a conscious entity watching you from the shadows. You are witnessing a reproduction, a playback of an informational echo that triggers when the environmental conditions, such as humidity or temperature, align perfectly with the moment the recording was made. This is a glitch in the masonry that refuses to be deleted by the passage of time. There is no agency here, only the persistence of data. The haunting is a technical error in the flow of time, an informational loop that repeats its tragedy to anyone with the sensitivity to perceive the vibration. It is a world where the inanimate has become a library of our darkest hours. This theory suggests that our environments are not static backgrounds but active, albeit unconscious, participants in our history. A house does not just hold people, it holds the cumulative weight of their experiences in its very bones. Price proposed the existence of a psychic ether that serves as a bridge between physical reality and the memory of objects, a medium through which these recordings can be accessed by the living. This is the ultimate exercise of power, the withdrawal of the event into the silence of the stone where it remains uncapturable and unerasable by the administrative gaze of modern society. We are surrounded by these informational echoes, walking through a labyrinth of fog where every sound is a reminder of a pact we no longer know how to honor. We are the inhabitants of a recorded reality. The stone tape theory differentiates itself from traditional hauntings by its absolute lack of interaction. These ghosts do not respond to questions, they do not change their path, they do not acknowledge the observer in any capacity. They are simply part of the architecture of the location, as much a part of the building as the foundation or the rafters. This perspective shifts the focus of paranormal research from the who to the what, turning the investigation into an archaeological study of energy and memory. We are living in a world of residual playback, where the past refuses to stay silent because the materials we use to build our shelters were also designed to hold our screams. We have created monuments to our own suffering without even realizing the recording was on. This withdrawal of the spirit into the architecture represents a radical and terrifying form of persistence. In a world that demands instant quantification and total digital transparency, the silence of the stone and its hidden recordings represent the last sovereign territory of human experience. You cannot hack the sacred recording. You cannot optimize the residual energy for profit. You can only live with the consequences of inhabiting a space that remembers everything you have tried to forget. The environment acts as a mirror, reflecting our inability to be faithful to the pacts we made with our history and our own capacity for reverence. When we lost the understanding of the sacred, we lost the ability to distinguish between a living consciousness and a dead recording. We are left wandering in a landscape of shadows, trying to find substance in the echoes of a world that was once alive with intent, but is now merely repeating its final, agonizing moments in an endless loop of informational decay. This is the price of our modern efficiency. We are living in a graveyard of data, surrounded by the ghosts of a history we have discarded, but can never truly escape. The stone tape is the ultimate archive of the ignored. It suggests that even if we erase our digital footprints, the physical world refuses to let go of the truth. We are being watched by the walls, not by eyes, but by the molecular memory of every act of violence and every cry of despair that has ever occurred within them. The past is not dead, it is simply waiting for the right environmental trigger to play back its tragedy. We have turned our homes into museums of the unseen, yet we lack the keys to understand the exhibits. This informational persistence creates a psychic weight that we carry without knowing its origin. It is the heavy air of an old hospital, the oppressive silence of a forgotten prison, or the inexplicable chill in a modern apartment built on ancient ground. We are constantly interacting with these echoes, our own bioelectrical fields grazing against the recorded trauma of those who came before us. It is a silent dialogue between the living and the recorded, a dance of frequencies that reminds us that nothing is ever truly forgotten. The ledger of the stone is absolute, and its balance is maintained by the sheer weight of its molecular memory. We are merely temporary guests in a reality that is permanently haunted by its own history. The ghost has finally found its place within the ultimate administrative and rational system of our era, the court of law. To understand the modern specter, we must look beyond the cemetery gates and into the sterile, fluorescent-lit halls of the justice system. The landmark case of Stambovsky v. Ackley, decided in 1991 by the New York Appellate Division, serves as the definitive autopsy of how a haunting is translated into the language of the ledger. Known famously as the Ghostbuster ruling, this legal precedent determined that, as a matter of law, a house can indeed be haunted. The facts of the case strip away the romanticism of the supernatural. Jeffrey Stambovsky purchased a home in Nyack, New York, unaware that the seller Helen Ackley had spent years promoting the property nationally as a dwelling infested by poltergeists. When Stambovsky attempted to back out of the deal upon learning of the home's reputation, the court intervened. The ruling established that because the seller had actively fostered and capitalized on the house's haunted status, she was legally barred from denying its existence to force a sale under the traditional doctrine of caveat emptor. The specter was no longer a matter of faith, it was a material defect, a psychological and reputational stigma that impacted the economic reality of the property. This legal reality confirms a fundamental truth. Regardless of the ontological or metaphysical existence of spirits, their impact on the economy, social perception, and the human heart is a quantifiable fact. We have successfully moved the monsters from the basement into the legal department and the server room. The sovereignty of the mist has been replaced by the sovereignty of the contract. This brings us to the final lesson of the Spectral Ledger. Sovereignty is not something granted by a system or an algorithm, it is something you possess and protect within the sacred limits of your own being. When we forget this hierarchy of needs, we lose everything that makes our lives more than a simple struggle for survival. We are living in the profound silence left behind by the withdrawal of the divine, trying to fill the void with the noise of 1,000 machines and legal briefs that can never tell us the truth. The autopsy of the specter is, in the end, an autopsy of our own betrayal of the sacred. We chose the mundane over the divine, and in return, we were given exactly what we asked for, a world of pure utility and zero wonder. The stone tape in your walls and the ghost in your machine are the collection of parts you have traded for efficiency and digital convenience. As we close this investigation into the spectral persistence, look at the shadows in your own hallway as a reminder of what is at stake. If you do not write your own myth, the system will write a horror story for you, and the price of that story will be your own sense of reality. The ghost is not an invader. It is a mirror reflecting the parts of ourselves we have discarded to become more compatible with a heartless, quantified world. The ledger must be balanced, but the currency required is a level of reverence and honesty that we have largely forgotten how to provide. We are the architects of our own haunting, building structures that record our failures and drafting contracts that attempt to legislate the invisible. The administrative gaze can map the infrasound, it can analyze the ectoplasm, and it can litigate the haunted house, but it can never capture the essence of the mystery that remains. We are standing at the edge of an abyss that we have created, watching as the last of the ancient wonder vanishes into a technical report. The true horror is not that ghosts exist, but that we have turned them into material defects. We have domesticated the infinite and put a price tag on the unknown. In this world of absolute transparency and relentless data, the only thing that remains truly hidden is our own humanity. The autopsy is finished, the cause of death is recorded, and the files are being uploaded into the eternal archive of the forgotten. We are all participants in this grand recording, leaving behind echoes in the stone and glitches in the code that will haunt those who come after us. We must decide if we want to be more than just residual data in a dying system. The path back to the sacred is blocked by the ledgers we have spent centuries filling, but the first step is acknowledging the weight of the silence we have inherited. The specter is waiting for a resolution that no court can provide and no laboratory can measure. It is waiting for us to remember who we were before we became part of the machine. The mist is rising once again, not as a sign of the supernatural but as a veil covering a world that we no longer have the eyes to see. We are left alone with our ledgers and our law, wandering through a reality that has been perfectly quantified and utterly drained of its soul. This is Krista. Until next time, keep blasphemous, folks.